Obama and the Democrats have begun to start to fight back. Now, it's a mixed bag, and I'll tell you why. There's a story out in Huffington Post today. They did an interview with Nancy Pelosi, and she's going gangbusters after the Republicans and Boehner as well. And she's saying, he's not going to take my gavel, and we think we got him on the run. And she's talking about how they had a special election in Pennsylvania to replace John Murtha, and the Republicans thought they were going to win. And she's like, instead, we delivered an elbow from the sky, and we thought we were going to win by 3 points. We beat them by 8.5 points. She says, look, we've got the ground battle locked up, and now John Boehner's complaining that the Democrats have too much money and he can't compete with that. So all of a sudden the momentum has swung and the Democrats look like they're on the attack. Now, the part I like about the attack is both Obama and Pelosi emphasizing, look, these guys stood up for the big bankers. They're standing up for them now. They stood up for the giant healthcare companies in healthcare reform, and they didn't want that. They stood up for BP. They apologized to BP, the famous Joe Barton line, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I love that line of attack because the GOP is a wholly owned subsidiary of corporate America, and we all know it. And that's all they ever do, and it's about damn time that the Democrats pointed it out. Fantastic. The problem is the Democrats don't really act on it. And think about that, because this is so important. As we get close to an election, every time we get within 6 months of an election, the Democrats are the most progressive people you've ever seen. Oh, we're going to end the wars. We're going to do reform. We've got change. We've got hope. We're going to take on the status quo. And today you heard Obama say, yeah, well, I plan to take on the status quo. We're going to crush you. The minute the election is over, they're like, well, come on. We can't really change anything. Here's a tiny little bit of change. Come on, enjoy. Run off. Run off, right? But the reason I find that interesting is not just because of the broken promises and I'm tired of, going through this cycle year after year. The real reason is, so they must think the way to win elections is to be really progressive. That's what the country wants. And since the country is more progressive than they are, that's the direction they'll run in during the elections. But when it comes to actually legislating, they think, no. The legislation shouldn't be progressive. The politics should be progressive. And then after we win, then we'll screw them over. But why? If you think that's the way to win, why don't you just do it? Why don't you actually follow through? Why don't you do real healthcare reform, real financial reform? There's an article out today about healthcare. Guess what? If you have a pre-existing condition, your premiums are going to go way up. And they say, well, no, look, we're going to get you coverage eventually 4 years from now. Now your premiums are going to be much, much, much higher. But hey, we got your reform. And by the way, the other thing is you have to fill out like 7 different forms. You have to say, oh yeah, but I had insurance before. I don't have it now. I haven't had it for 6 months. I do have a pre-existing condition. I'm willing to pay more, et cetera, et cetera. And who's still left in charge? The healthcare companies, right? And Obama said in a campaign ad, he ran a campaign ad on it, saying, oh, I'm not going to do those drug company deals where the guy who wrote the legislation then went and got a $2 million salary from the healthcare companies, from the drug companies. That's the same exact guy, Billy Tauzin, that went into the White House and made the same exact deal with Obama, where the drug companies are protected, their monopolies are protected, the government cannot negotiate with them, and we cannot import drugs from anywhere else, and their patents get extended to 12 years. It's actually worse than Bush's deal. So, oh yeah, when election time comes around, you're a progressive giant. When it comes time to deal making, well, all of a sudden the drug companies have to have their monopoly because they spend a lot of money in politics. And when it comes to financial reform, well, we'd love to actually stop derivatives trading or do the Volcker rule, but you know what? The banks are so powerful. We'd love to have them pay $20 billion for this, but the Republicans, they twisted our arms. Oh, Scott Brown, don't do it. Oh, yeah, it turns out, no, you're going to pay the $20 billion instead of the bankers. So, on the one hand, I'm glad they're finally making a case for their own side. It's taken them long enough. On the other hand, I'm just a little too jaded. I don't think they're going to follow through, and I say that based on previous experience. And come November, the second week of November, after they've already won the elections, they'll go back to making those same deals. And by the way, why? Why, right? You must be asking why right now. It's because They need your votes. And the way to get your votes is by pretending to be progressive and against the establishment. But they also need the money, Lebowski, because the money buys your votes. Not because they pay you for your vote, because they run ads and they have more resources. And as Nancy Pelosi said, they have boots on the ground. And how do they pay for all that? Well, they get money from the drug companies, the oil companies, and the bankers. So they think, great, if behind the scenes, we sell out to those guys and they give us the money, and then during the election, we use that money to tell people, oh, we really stuck it to those guys. Well, perfect. Then everybody's tricked into believing we have. Look, I hate to say this, but I'm beginning to think in a lot of ways the Democrats are more dangerous than the Republicans. Because the Republicans are obvious. I mean, look at Boehner. He's an idiot. He comes out and says, oh, financial reform. I wish we hadn't done it. It's a nuclear weapon on ants. It's terrible. It's overbroad, overambitious. And he goes and tells the Wall Street Journal, I just had a meeting with the bankers, and I told them that I'll deliver better than the Democrats. Knucklehead, right? I mean, and John Cornyn, same thing. They're just, Haley Barbour, same thing. Joe Barton, same thing. They just come on TV and go, oh, no, we got to protect BP. No, don't charge them. They'll pay later, maybe, voluntarily. No, charge the taxpayers, right? They're obvious. The Democrats are a lot more subtle. Like, oh, we're on your side. We went after those sons of bitches in the status quo. And then what do we have? We don't have real reform.